Welcome to today's tutorial. Today we are going to show you how to build a piece of terrain for your fantasy gaming table. We're going to start by sanding our XPS foam, then we're going to mark off some 1-inch spaces on this board. This is going to be a wilderness piece, so we're really going to dive into the wilderness aspect of this piece of terrain. Thomas is just scoring the marks and then reinforcing them with a pencil to give it a really pronounced tile layout. Using the hot wire foam cutter, Thomas is going to go ahead and begin cutting out an organic shape on this tile layout. This is going to be a rather large piece of terrain. This is going to be a perfect centerpiece for your fantasy gaming table, whether you're playing 9th Age, Age of Sigmar, or Saga Age of Magic. Now here you see the footprint of our piece of terrain. Thomas is now going to go ahead and he's replicated this process on another piece of our XPS foam, and he's going to cut out slightly smaller organic shapes, and we're going to begin layering these shapes to add layers, almost like a layered hill or maybe an old piece of temple ruin that's been taken over by the earth. You don't have to be too precise, you just want to make sure that this next piece fits inside of the larger footprint. And now we're going to cut out some jagged edges. This is going to add some visual interest, almost as if there's pieces of ruin or rock and stone that have fallen on top of this piece of terrain. Again, using the hot wire foam cutter, we're going to carefully bevel the edges to give it a natural appearance. This should make the rocky rubble look more realistic. Now on this top layer of our ruined wall, Thomas is very carefully along these straight edges. He's going to insert the wire from the hot wire foam cutter and create some little cutouts here. These could be fashioned into pools or lakes or even lava pits, depending on what your theme is. And now Thomas is going to begin layering up all of that rocky rubble that he had previously cut out. We're just going to apply some of that basing glue, some of that XPS foam glue to the bottom of these rocky rubble pieces, and we're going to layer them in a vertical but random fashion. The more random that you apply these, the more realistic the effect is. When cutting your rocky rubble, it is best to cut them in multiple different scales, shapes, and sizes. Follow the rule of 3, some big, some medium, and some small ones. That way you have some options when you're building up the height of this piece of terrain. Adding a cave to this rocky outcrop is really simple. This is totally optional, but using the hot wire foam cutter, you can then go ahead and begin carving out the shape of your cave very, very simply. And there you have it. We've got our basing glue again, and we're going to begin applying this in a random fashion, and we're focusing this on the rocky outcrop and other pieces of this terrain feature. Now with a brush, we're going to spread it out in a more randomized fashion to give it a more realistic flow, because next we're going to be applying some scenery sand to it to add even more texture to this terrain feature. We'll just apply the scenery sand all over the glue that we applied, and now we've removed the excess. You can save that for later projects. Now we're going to prime the model using the GameMaster Wilderness and Woodland Terrain Primer. We're going to give the can a good shake and head to a well-ventilated area, and then begin applying a nice smooth coat of this rich dark green wilderness and woodland primer all over the pieces of this terrain. Our terrain primers are 100% safe to use on foam because they won't melt it, and they're perfect for use on MDF terrain as well. When you're finished, turn the can upside down and spray until pigment stops emitting from the nozzle. This is a great way to keep that nozzle clean for future use. Once your primer has dried, it's time to apply your first highlight. We're going to be using the dry brushing technique and green skin from the Army Painter War Paints range. We're going to use a large dry brush here to flick the green skin paint over the raised areas of this terrain feature. You do want to leave some of the wilderness and woodland primer in the recesses just to add some contrast. If you apply too much of the green skin, you're going to lose out on some of the depth and shading on the model. Now we're using Goblin Green to apply a more focused highlight on the most extreme edges of this terrain feature. We recommend applying one final highlight of necrotic flesh over the most extreme edges, and especially the scenery sand that we glued onto the base. This is really going to bring out the texture in this terrain feature. And there you have it. You can really see how the contrast is pushed from that rich dark brownish green up to that brighter necrotic flesh on this wilderness fantasy piece. Now we're going to apply a wash, and we're going to focus this especially into the corners and over top of the scenery sand again. Now you can use any wash. You could use our subterranean wash from the Game Master range, or anything from the quick shades, whether it's dark tone or strong tone. This is just going to help add more depth and realism to your piece. Now that we've applied our shadows using the wash on this terrain feature, we're going to begin filling in the pools. Now you can fill in the pools in any color you want. If you want it to be a lava pool, go ahead and use some red and orange paints. If you want it to be a natural water feature, use blue paints. We're going to use Disgusting Slime here. This is a glossy effects paint. It gives it a really cool toxic, or in this case, an algae effect. You'll want to apply at least one thin coat, allow it to dry, and then come back and apply a second coat just to make sure you have a nice, even, glossy coat over top. Thomas has taken some masking tape, and he's just going to mask off those pools because we're going to start adding an extra level of texture to this terrain feature. He's applying some of his XPS foam sculpting glue in random spots and areas where he thinks that moss and grass would naturally grow on this piece of terrain. Once he's applied the glue, he's going to apply some of our Battlefield steppe grass on top of it. Now Thomas is just going to grab some of the flock. He's applied it to a piece of paper to help keep the mess a little bit more contained, and he's just going to work its way into the glue before it dries like so. When you're finished applying all of your steppe grass and your flock, you can go ahead and shake off the excess and then save it for later use. To add even more foliage and realistic appearance to the foliage to your terrain piece, go ahead and grab some of our Battlefields Tufts. Thomas is using some lowland shrubs. These are perfect for this wilderness and woodland themed terrain piece. And then he's going to grab some meadow flowers. We always recommend using a combination of 1 or 2 different tufts to really give it a realistic appearance. And meadow flowers and lowland shrubs work really, really well together. Now we're going to apply a little bit more of our Battlefields basing glue, or our XPS foam glue, to the base. And what Thomas is going to do here, he's going to make almost like a walking path. This is a really cool way to add a little bit more narrative to your terrain pieces. So he's just applying the glue, then he's going to sprinkle on some of our Battlefields brown Battleground, just like so. And it does really give it that realistic, almost like a hiking path. Somebody is walking their way through this piece of terrain into the cave in the center. And if you'd like to, you can go ahead and apply some of that XPS foam sculpting glue to random areas in between the foliage on top of the terrain piece. This is going to give it a very realistic woodland experience. We hope that you enjoyed all of the tips and tricks found inside of this tutorial. More than anything, we hope that you noticed just how fun it can be to build your own terrain with the Game Master range of products from the Army Painter. This versatile range of products is perfect for building anything from dungeon tiles to wargaming terrain. Whether it's historical gaming, science fiction, or fantasy, Game Master has something for you. Check it out at thearmypainter.com.